My business does focus quite a bit on healthcare, so we find ourselves, and I find myself personally, in many different healthcare settings when I go into as a consultant, and it ranges from Children's Hospital Boston to Hebrew Senior Life and everything in between. And when I am there, I often just take a pause and just say a little quiet prayer of gratitude for all the people who are called to work in healthcare. It is the most important issue of our day, and it affects lives day in and day out at a very personal level. And I honor all of you women in healthcare, and I salute you. I thank you. I think you're doing really wonderful work. I think the influence of women in medicine has had a profound impact on healthcare today. And I'll ask the panelists about that later, but I think so, and that is what I have seen. You know, when I do see a caregiver who expresses compassion in his or her work, I wonder, you know, how they got to that point. And I think, you know, it's really the fact that they take a moment to actually really care, that it's not just a job. And I think it's probably something very conscious that one takes a moment to say, I'm just going to be a little bit more kind, a little bit slower, and really exercise that degree of compassion that doesn't always come easily in the healthcare system today. When compassion is absent, I wonder if it's because one becomes too fearful to get that involved, to make that connection, or is it just that empathy is not recognized as an important value in our culture today? Sometimes I think that we interpret tenderness with weakness, or we associate sensitivity with frailty. And in fact, tenderness and sensitivity and compassion are what define us, defines our humanity.
I'm at the beginning of a journey through the healthcare system, one in which I feel like I will need many guides, all sorts of guides for many years to come. My son, Eli, my oldest son, Eli, was diagnosed last September with autism. He was a few months shy of his 4th birthday. The diagnosis was a bit of a surprise. He was slow to speak, you know, had short attention span. You know, a lot of 4-year-olds are like that. But he was otherwise very happy and very healthy. It didn't occur to me he could be autistic. Eli was already enrolled in a special education preschool class in Milton Public Schools, you know, to help with his delayed speech. And the teachers there didn't think he was autistic, but suggested I should get him tested just to be sure. So you can imagine my shock sitting at Children's Hospital when the doctor broke the news to me. You know, it was one of those moments where the doctor's talking, the words are coming out of her mouth. I mean, I felt like it was in a movie, you know, and nothing is registering to me. I'm completely zoned out, struggling to absorb, you know, what's next. Being a working mom was hard enough. Now I was about to become a mom of a child with special needs. Was I up to this? If the first stage was shock, the next was anger. Mad that I was here without my husband to deal with this news that could change our lives and our sons forever. I didn't feel like it was the end of the world, but I did feel like my world was about to be turned upside down. And I can still remember sitting in the doctor's office and sitting there with his developmental pediatrician, Jennifer Lucarelli, and she was diligently going over this lengthy write-up. I think it was like 20 pages about my son's diagnosis and treatment. And even though my husband wasn't there, I did not feel alone. I felt like I was in good hands with Dr. Lucarelli. She was concerned for me, but she didn't act like she felt sorry for me. And believe me, that happens a lot when you tell people you have a child with autism. She was matter of fact, but at the same time wanted to make sure I understood what I needed to do next. My son needed about 25 hours a week of structured instruction therapy, and that's a lot for a 4-year-old. But I got a sense from the doctors, teachers, and behavior analysts that this kind of early and intense intervention was critical to giving Eli a chance at leading a normal life. I also got the sense that, they could see what his life would be like without such intervention. And that's what was propelling the healthcare system, from the doctors to the insurer to kind of all kick into gear. Admittedly, I was in a bit of a denial of all of this, and certainly my husband was in denial about our son's diagnosis. I mean, again, he's this cute, happy little kid, and but I felt really lucky to be living in Massachusetts. We have incredibly strong laws related to treating autism. We have this great healthcare system, and that I've really come to appreciate in that moment in the last few months in dealing with my son's diagnosis. I mean, I really felt the sense that everybody was coming together on our behalf at a time when, we're kind of stunned. We're not sure what we were going to do. So I have to tell you, you'll never hear me, and Jim, you should know this, never hear me complain about higher premiums because I felt that this system was incredible. And it could not have been easier to get insurance. It could not have been easier to get insurance to cover the costs of in-home one-on-one therapy for our son 5 days a week. I mean, I don't even want to know what it's doing to drive up the globe's healthcare costs. And besides Dr. Lucarelli being on hand to answer any questions, Children's Hospital provided another advocate from developmental medicine, a guy named Neil Goodman, who would, you could call and, could provide ongoing support. He sends monthly email updates. I mean, you didn't feel like a faceless patient, and you felt like something was happening to you. You could call a doctor, you could call somebody in this vast system to help you at any time. Eli also has a rotation of 3 therapists, Miss Dana, Miss Angela, and Miss Leone, who come to our home 2 hours a day to help him with his speech and social skills. And they're like family. They almost act like another set of parents. And it's only been 6 months, really, through this whole treatment process, but Eli's making progress, albeit slowly. 1 in 68 children are on the autism spectrum, up 30% from 2 years ago. Doctors aren't sure why. It could be that there's more awareness, and autism is more prevalent in boys, 1 in 40. And if one child has autism, there's a 20% chance the sibling could be autistic too. Eli's 2-year-old brother, Evan, will get tested in a couple of weeks. So yes, I could be a mother of 2 autistic kids. But I said before, I don't feel alone, and I don't feel helpless. For all the bad headlines about the healthcare system, ours was a case in which the healthcare system worked for us, and when we needed it the most. It's going to be a long journey. I don't know where Eli will end up. I'm not quite ready to think about his future. I'm just focused on the present. But I do feel like his doctors and his therapists are rooting for him.
I'm also going to talk about my child, a little more of an upbeat story. The story about my daughter, Julia. And it happened a couple of years ago. 6, playing outside with her sister. She's a very rambunctious kid. And she was running into the house to come tell me something, but her head was turned and she ran flat into our front door handle, into her forehead, and had a bloody, gushing gash from her forehead. So what do? Take her to Children's. And of course, everybody who's a parent knows you step through those doors and you are just braced for the worst. You're going to wait, there are going to be kids screaming, your kids is screaming. It's going to be sort of the rest of the evening spent there. So we get into a room, and Julia's upset. What is going to happen? Am I going to need stitches? And in walks this very tall, dark, lean attending physician. Name's Baruch Krause. And comes in, very tall guy, and immediately he gets down on the floor and takes Julia's foot and says, "I love your sparkly shoes." And he won her over immediately. Now, of course, it's children, so everybody comments on the kid's clothes. Oh, what a pretty dress. But there was something about the way he just got down on his knees with her and looked at her shoes that I knew there was something going on with this guy. So then he starts putting this lidocaine jelly on her forehead, and he says, "I'll be right back." And he comes back every 5 minutes and does it about 5 times. And I'm thinking, does she need this much jelly? What is he doing? And I mean, I learned later that he was basically just getting her used to his hands on her skin and him coming in and out and just trying to calm her down. And also, of course, I was a nervous wreck. I was pacing. My husband was videotaping the entire, and actually I wrote a blog post about it. If you want to go look, there's video. So, you know, he's telling me to calm down, and I'm telling him to stop videoing, and Julia's like, what's going to happen? Anyway, so I went to get snacks. That was my, coping. So I'm in the hallway, and Baruch comes back, and he says, "Okay, I want you to go with me here. I'm going to do a little something. You may think it's a little gimmicky, but just work with me." And I'm like, whatever. So he comes in with a big an oversized coloring book, and a big can of magic markers, and he says, "Julia, here is a picture of 101 Dalmatians," and there were literally 100 dogs on this huge coloring book. He said, "I want you to color every dog's ear a different color, and I want you to color their paws a different color, and I want you to narrate while you are drawing and tell me each color you are choosing and why." And of course, for a 6-year-old, this is just heaven, and she loves a good task. So she's like, "Give it to me," and she starts coloring. I'm doing this purple because this dog is big, he's the prince, he gets purple, whatever. She's got her whole story going. And he starts, the big needle comes out. We've got it on video. And, he gives her a big shot in the head, and he starts stitching. And she's talking, and, "Wait, no, Mommy, get out of the way. I'm going to color it this way. And what do you think I should color the paw?" Anyway, she is so engrossed in this task. He had about 10, 11 stitches. Walk out of the hospital, and she looks at me and she says, "Well, Mom, at least I didn't have to get stitches." And I said, "Julia, you did get stitches." And she's like, "Wow, that was fun." And I'm like, oh my God, what is wrong with my kid? She's so oblivious. Okay, but it's not over. So it was a pretty good children's experience as they go. So 2 nights later, the phone rings about 9:30. "Hi, it's Dr. Baruch Krause. I'm just checking in to see how Julia is and what her experience was in the room." And I'm like, who is this guy? What doctor has ever called you back 2 days later to check in after your kid's in the emergency? So I said, "She's fine." And he said, "And what did she talk about her experience? Was it good?" I said, "It was great. She didn't even know she got stitches." And he said, "Well, that's great. I'm really glad. And if you need anything." But this guy is not for real. So I go look him up. And it turns out his research is on how to mitigate pain for kids in the emergency room. That's been his life's work. And of course, all of my life is material for my blog. So I went to interview him and did a story about him. And he basically began in emergency medicine and realized that most of kids' experience in the ER is terrible and traumatic, and they don't want to see doctors again. And the parents usually feel like, well, at least my kid's coming out alive, so I will deal with a negative experience. At least they're okay. You sort of suck it up, right, when you go to the ER. And he felt that was wrong. His father was a rabbi, he was very religious, and he felt like there should be ways to have seeing a doctor not be a traumatic experience for a child, and that involved reducing their pain. So he came up with all these techniques, and he actually used to hypnotize kids in the exam room, and children's was kind of like, maybe you shouldn't call it hypnosis, that's a little out there, and parents are going to freak out. And but what he really does, it's fairly simple. He basically diverts their attention in such a profound way that they stop thinking about the wound and they're thinking about the coloring book. And he has other various techniques that he talked about when I did the interview. And I just thought, wow, this is really how all medicine should be. Why are we settling for these traumatic experiences when this guy really, I mean, he was incredible. And so the postscript to this story is 2 years later, Julia was in a play, and she was backstage jumping off the banisters, and she jumped up and hit her head on the ceiling, in this part of the ceiling, and her head's bleeding again from the top. So we take her to the ER at Children's, and she's like, "Where's Baruch Krause? I only want to see Baruch Krause." And actually, he had given me his cell phone number, and I called him. He's like, "I'm really sorry. I'm in Rome right now. I can't help you." So so first of all, we had the absolute opposite experience. We walk in, and the intake nurse looks at Julia and says, "Oh, you're going to need staples." And Julia's like, "Staples in my head? Are you kidding?" And then we get in, and this young doctor comes in and says, "Oh, yes, staples." And she says, "Here, Julia, here's the staple gun that I'm going to use." And she started to panic. And she's screaming, and it was just the absolute opposite experience. I mean, why you would tell a 7-year-old, now she's 8, why you would tell an 8-year-old you're going to put staples in their head and not explain, I mean, it's just, anyway, so it was really painful and very traumatic and anxiety producing for us, obviously. And, it probably, the pain levels were equal, but she will never forget that experience and never forget how bad that doctor was compared to Baruch Krause. So I just think, we've all had the bad experience, but wouldn't it be nice if we could all have that stellar experience as well?
Until 2003, I was in complete control of my life. I had a great job at Mass General as an urgent care doc. I had a dream gig at WBZ as a television health reporter, a happy marriage, a new starter home in the suburbs, and I had a 1-year-old black and white cockapoo named Cosmo. Life was good. But I always wanted to be a mom, and while my husband and I hadn't really started trying to have kids, I was afraid that at the age of 33, I was getting a little long in the tooth and had better get on it. So being the type A control freak that I am, I immediately consulted a fertility doctor, just to make sure everything was okay. Now, just so you know, if you consult a fertility specialist, you'll end up on a fertility path of no return. So within weeks of my first appointment, I was taking pills, then I was giving myself shots and doing artificial insemination, and before I knew it, we were heading for IVF. Mally, that's what my husband calls me, Mally, don't you think this is premature? We hadn't even started trying to have a baby. And I think he was mainly upset that we had skipped over that seemingly fun part where couples have lots of sex to get things going. But I could not be dissuaded. We needed to keep going because my 34th birthday was right around the corner. Now, some of you probably know IVF is the pits. It's a lonely, painful journey that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Not that I have enemies. But being a doctor, I had complete faith in science. I knew it would work. I just had to put in the time. What I didn't realize was that it could be humiliating. I mean, I was a public figure, a minor one, albeit, but someone whom people on occasion would recognize, and I certainly didn't want the world to know that I was struggling to get pregnant. So I snuck around at work, on airplanes, in restaurants, with little needles and vials to inject into my belly at the appointed times. I hid behind sunglasses and under a baseball cap in the clinic countless times, waiting to get an ultrasound or a blood test. I would cringe every time they called out my name for an appointment. Ms. Marshall or Mallika. Thank goodness most people can't pronounce my name. And then I was told time and time again that the 2-month process that I had just completed was a complete waste of time. The drugs, the blood tests, the ultrasounds, the waiting, all for naught. I started to actually feel bad for my fertility nurse. She was a lovely woman, gentle and kind, and certainly used to delivering bad news. But after 8 negative pregnancy tests with all of the treatments that I had over many months, even she had a hard time leaving me those dreaded messages. Hi, Mallika. It's Susan. I'm sorry to tell you that the test is negative.
I know you must be disappointed, but the team will go back to the drawing board and come up with a new regimen to try next time around. We'll be in touch. I still remember the sinking feeling I would get every time I listened to those messages, alone in my car after work, since I didn't want to listen to them during the day and risk messing up my mascara with tears. When I was asked to think of an example of compassion in healthcare, I immediately thought of the compassion I felt from that fertility nurse as I quickly transformed from a confident, take-charge, fearless physician to a desperate, insecure, and frightened patient. Throughout the horrid process, she gave me hope, she held my hand, she showed me respect, and in the end, she and the team made me a mom. I cry every time I get to this part. I never forget the day that Susan finally got to leave the following message on my voicemail. Mallika, you are pregnant. I think she was happier than I was, and I wanted to reach through the phone and hug her. In the end, Susan stood by me through 4 months of Clomid, 3 cycles of artificial insemination, and 7 rounds of IVF. It eventually took 7 rounds to have my 2 boys, and then, of course, my daughter just appeared spontaneously out of nowhere. Of course she did. Maybe my husband was right after all. All we needed was a little faith and a little more sex. But Susan will also hold a special place in my heart, and to this day I send her a Christmas card every year so she can see how my little embryos are growing up. And now I pay it forward, not by design, but because the experience I had as a patient has made me a much better doctor. I remember one awful afternoon when I had to go in for excuse me, gentlemen in the room, a vaginal ultrasound. One in which they have to place a large probe in your you-know-what to see how your eggs are developing. By this time, my first son was about 9 months old, and I had started the awful process again to try to have another child. I'm lying on the bed with the radiology tech asking me to spread my legs and relax, and I was balancing my infant son on my chest because he had been fussy in his stroller. I was trying to keep him quiet, cooing at him, singing to him, while the tech probed further and further into my nether regions. And then my sweet little boy had explosive diarrhea in his onesie. You know, the kind that goes out the diaper and up the back. And all I could think to myself was, it doesn't get any more humiliating than this. And suddenly I had a newfound appreciation for all of the young mothers who had come into our urgent care over the years with a GYN complaint with their kids in tow. And I remember how mad I would get at them, that they had brought their kids with them to the doctor. I can't do a pelvic exam with kids wandering all around the exam room. Can't you leave your kids with someone else? And now I realize, no, they can't. Here I am, gainfully employed with more help than most, and I couldn't find someone to watch my kid that day lying on an exam table with a probe in my, I can honestly say, having been a patient myself and having felt vulnerable and at the mercy of my doctors and nurses, I get it now. So the compassion I was given as a patient, I now give to my own patients. And I remind myself that no matter who you are, or how educated you are, or how informed you are, you will one day be that patient who is just looking for a little understanding and a lot of help, without attitude and without judgment. Thank you.